What if God came to you right now and told you to leave everything caught behind? Your home, your family, your entire future. Everything you've ever built. Could you do it? Would you? This isn't some hypothetical. This is how God started with a man named Abram. Imagine an older man, settled, prosperous, surrounded by his tribe in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram had a good life, a predictable life. Then God intervened. His command was shattering, not a suggestion, an order. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Genesis 12:1. Think about that. For a man of that era, leaving your homeland wasn't just a change of address. It was tearing up your identity, your security. It meant abandoning every certainty and stepping into a complete, terrifying unknown. No map, no clear destination, just a voice and a promise. But here's the kicker: a monumental promise accompanied this radical call. God continued, "And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Genesis 12:2-3. A great nation. For a man with no children, whose wife was barren, whose circumstances screamed impossible. Yet, Abram didn't hesitate. He didn't negotiate. In an astounding display of faith, he packed up his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, his servants, his belongings, and he set out. Without knowing exactly where he was going. Can you picture that? The dust on the road. The endless horizon. The whispers of doubt perhaps, but something stronger than doubt was driving him, an unshakable trust in the word of God. This wasn't just a move. It was a declaration. Abram left a land steeped in idols and human-made gods to follow the call of God, who promised something far greater than he could possibly comprehend. With every step, he left behind not just a land, but an old life. He was literally walking into a new future, built on nothing but faith. And so began the epic journey of the one who would later be called Abraham, the father of a multitude, a name that echoes to this day as a symbol of radical faithfulness and daring hope. So, I have to ask you, what is God calling you to leave behind? What comfort, what security, what known is he asking you to surrender, so you can step into an unseen future with him? Are you willing to walk away from everything familiar? Just like Abram did, trusting that his promise is greater than your fear. We chase what we can see, don't we? The tangible, the logical. But what if God promises you the invisible? What if his blueprint for your life makes no sense to your eyes? As Abram journeyed through the land of Canaan, it wasn't an empty landscape waiting to be occupied. It was filled with established peoples, fortified cities, and ancient cultures. It didn't look like something that would naturally fall into his hands. But God was promising the impossible, and he kept reminding Abram. Again, in Genesis 12:7, God appeared and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." A profound promise, yet still fraught with questions. Abram still had no children. Both he and Sarai were advanced in age. How could he become the father of a great nation, let alone inherit an entire land? It's easy to imagine Abram pitching his tents in unfamiliar territory, pondering this. The land was inhabited, his wife was barren. Everything seemed to contradict the divine word. This part of the story teaches us a profound truth about God's nature. He doesn't just make promises, he reaffirms them along the way. It is as if he is saying, "Trust me. I know it seems impossible, but what I say, I keep." For Abram, every word from God was an invitation to believe in something his eyes could not yet see. But don't think Abram's faith was automatic. He faced deep internal dilemmas. In Genesis 15, he cries out, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. This wasn't a lack of faith. It was an honest, human question, an expression of his soul's deepest longing and doubt. God's response, powerful. He takes Abram outside his tent, under the vast, inky sky. Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. And then, the mind-blowing declaration, so shall your offspring be. This was not just a promise. It was a visual, immeasurable, eternal declaration. Abram had no children, but God promised descendants as numerous as the stars. And what happened? And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. He didn't know when taunt or tantat it would happen, but he chose to trust God's promise. Abram's promise wasn't just about land or descendants. It was about something infinitely bigger. Sought a plan that would impact every nation on earth. Even when logic pointed to failure, Abram's faith pointed to a glorious future that only God could bring about. So, ask yourself, are you truly living by faith? Or are you constrained by what you can see, touch, and logically explain? What impossible promise has God given you that you're struggling to believe? Where are you letting sight limit what God can do in your life? We often put our heroes of faith on pedestals, don't we? We forget they were flesh and blood, just like us. What happens when your faith hits rock bottom? When the practical difficulties of life slam into God's promises? Abram, fresh off the high of God's promises, soon faced his first major trial. A severe famine struck the land, the very land God promised him. This forced Abram to seek sustenance in Egypt. This situation presented a profound dilemma. How do you trust in God's grand plan when you are facing immediate, crushing difficulties like starvation? During his stay in Egypt, Abram made a choice, a human choice, a fear-driven choice. Fearing for his life, he asked Sarai to introduce herself as his sister, hiding the fact that she was his wife. This wasn't a small oops. This mistake almost brought disaster not just to them, but to God's entire redemptive plan. It was a moment of profound human weakness and fear. But here is the breathtaking truth, even in Abram's failure. He intervened, protecting Abram and Sarai and miraculously freeing them from the serious consequences of his choices. This reveals such a vital truth about our God. He doesn't abandon us when we stumble. His faithfulness is not dependent on our flawless performance. After leaving Egypt, Abram returned to Canaan, richer than before, but also profoundly humbled. He returned to the place where he had built that first altar between Bethel and Ai, and called again on the name of the Lord. His return wasn't just geographic. It was spiritual. It was a recommitment. Abram was reaffirming his dependence on God, learning that the journey of faith isn't without setbacks. But the most important thing is always to return to the right path, to return to the altar of worship and trust. Abram's journey reminds us that faith is a process. It's full of ups and downs. Each altar erected, each step taken, each error overcome showed that even in difficulties, even in our fear-driven failures, God was guiding Abram. He was working to fulfill his promises. So, where have you let fear dictate your choices? What Egypt have you run to when faced with a famine in your life? And are you willing to return to the altar, to return to the place of dependence and worship, even after you've stumbled? Remember, God's faithfulness is bigger than your fear, always. What seems good to the eye can be a trap for the soul. We've all faced that choice, haven't we? The easy path versus the path of faith. Which one are you choosing? As Abram and his family continued to live in Canaan, their possessions grew. Flocks, servants, goods, everything multiplied. So much so that an unexpected problem arose. There wasn't enough space for Abram and his nephew Lot to live together. Their herdsmen began to dispute territories and resources, creating tension that threatened the harmony between them. Here, Abram demonstrates incredible wisdom and humility. He takes the initiative to resolve the situation, even though he was the elder and the leader. He says to Lot, "Let there be no strife between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." Genesis 13:8-9. Abram, the one with the promise, gave Lot the freedom to choose first. He demonstrated a profoundly peaceful character and an unwavering trust that God would take care of him. Regardless of Lot's choice, he wasn't scrambling for the best immediate gain. Lot, in turn, looked up. What did he see? The fertile, well-watered fields of the Jordan Valley, including the region of Sodom and Gomorrah. To human eyes, it seemed like the perfect choice. The valley was like the Garden of Eden, green, abundant, prosperous. Lot decided to go there, settling near Sodom, while Abram remained in the dry, less appealing hills of Canaan. This decision by Lot, while seemingly advantageous, had profound and devastating consequences. He chose based solely on what he saw, without considering the spiritual dangers lurking in Sodom, a city marked by evil. Living near it, he and his family would be at constant risk. This choice teaches us a critical lesson. Not everything that looks advantageous at first glance is, in fact, the best option for your soul. Convenience often comes at a spiritual cost. Immediately after the separation, God spoke to Abram again. He reaffirmed his promise, calling Abram to look around. "All the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever." Genesis 13:15. God showed Abram that while Lot's choice was based on what Lot could acquire, the promise to Abram was based on what God would unconditionally give if so. I challenge you, are you chasing what looks good, what seems easy or convenient, or are you willing to trust God's unseen promise, even if it means choosing the seemingly less prosperous path? Are you living by God's blueprint or your own immediate gratification? Your choices today determine your spiritual destiny. You think you have to earn God's promises. You think your effort, your striving, your perfect behavior is what makes God obligated to you. Think again. This next part of Abraham's story will shatter that misconception. As time passed, God continued to reveal himself to Abram, deepening their relationship and reaffirming his promise. But in Genesis 15, one of the most striking moments in biblical history occurs. God makes a formal, legally binding alliance with Abram, a pact that would seal the destiny not only of him but of all future generations. The narrative begins with God's powerful words. "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." These words were a mighty reminder that Abram was not alone, that God himself would protect him and reward him for his obedience. Yet, Abram, still childless, bravely brings his doubt to God. "O Lord God, what will you give me, for I continue childless?" God responds in that now familiar, amazing way. He takes Abram outside again, pointing to the heavens. "Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. And then, so shall your offspring be." The vision of the starry sky, a powerful, physical symbol of God's impossible promise for an elderly man and his barren wife. And Abram's response, "And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness." Genesis 15:6. But God didn't stop there. He establishes a covenant through a solemn, ancient ritual. Abram brings the animals God requested, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He cuts them in half, arranging the pieces to form a path. In ancient covenants, both parties would typically walk between the pieces, signifying that if either broke the agreement, they would suffer the same fate as the animals. But as Abram waits, God does something extraordinary. When the sun sets, a deep sleep falls upon Abram, and he sees a vision. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between these pieces. It was God himself, represented by fire, taking full responsibility for fulfilling the covenant. This promise, this monumental commitment, did not depend on Abram's strength, his perfect faith, or his flawless obedience. It depended not entirely on God's faithfulness, on his character. In this covenant, God confirmed he would give the land of Canaan to Abram's descendants. He revealed that Abraham's descendants would face a period of slavery in another land, but he would rescue them and fulfill his word. This alliance marked a new level in the relationship between God and Abram. It was a declaration that even in the midst of doubts and impossible circumstances, God would honor his promise, sealed with an eternal, unilateral commitment. So, what does this mean for you? Do you truly grasp the weight of God's unilateral promise? Are you constantly striving, trying to earn what God has already freely given through his covenant? Rest in the finished work of his promise. It is not about what Do can do. It's about what Side has already done and what he will do. Impatience. It's a powerful force, isn't it? Especially when God's promises feel impossibly delayed. We've all been there. We've all tried to help God out, to speed up his timeline with our own clever solutions. But what happens when we do that? Even after the unbreakable covenant was sealed, the wait for the promise to be fulfilled was agonizingly long. Abram and Sarai were already advanced in age, and the lack of children seemed more insurmountable with each passing year. Sarai, in particular, felt the crushing weight of time and the cultural shame of not having descendants. It was then that she proposed a human solution to a divine problem. A logical, culturally acceptable solution, yet miles away from God's perfect plan. Sarai suggested that Abram have a son with her servant Hagar, and Abram, instead of waiting, instead of holding fast to God's singular promise, accepted the suggestion. Hagar conceived. This decision had immediate, devastating consequences. Hagar, now pregnant, began to despise Sarai. Conflict erupted within the family, poisoning their relationships. Sarai, in turn, reacted harshly, driving Hagar to flee into the desert, heartbroken and desperate. But here's another glimpse of God's incredible compassion. Even when we go astray, in the desert, God found Hagar. An angel appeared to her, giving her direction. Return to your mistress and submit to her. Genesis 16:9. And in that desolate place, God also made a promise to Hagar. He declared that the son she carried, Ishmael, would be the father of a great nation. Even so, Ishmael was not the son of Asan Promise. He was the son of Jontaman Effort Battered. When Ishmael was born, Abram was 86 years old. It seemed to solve the dilemma. For years, Abram thought Ishmael would be the promised heir. He raised him with love, watched him grow. But God had not forgotten the initial, perfect promise. He had something bigger, something only he could bring about. This part of the story teaches us a profound, painful lesson. Even when we try to work things out on our own, even when our human solutions create conflicts and challenges, God remains faithful to Donti's plan. Our shortcuts often lead to detours, but his promise still stands. So, where are you trying to force God's hand? What human solution are you implementing because his timing feels too slow, too impossible? Are your good ideas actually hindering God's perfect sovereign plan? I challenge you, step back. Wait, trust his timing, not your own invention. His way is always worth waiting for. Ever laughed at God's promises? Secretly, maybe, Sarah did. And then God had the last, glorious laugh. This is where the truly impossible becomes unbelievably real. After years of waiting, after a promise that seemed increasingly distant and even tarnished by human intervention, God spoke to Abram again. But this time, he brought astonishing revelations. In Genesis 17, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of many nations, and Sarai's name to Sarah, meaning princess. This wasn't just symbolic, it was a prophetic declaration, a reminder that God's plan was vastly greater than any human circumstance or limitation. It was a renaming that spoke of a destiny that defied all logic. Furthermore, God established circumcision as a permanent sign of the covenant, something that would physically mark Abraham and his descendants as a people set apart for him. Even with all these confirmations, Abraham still had doubts. His raw honesty is refreshing. He fell on his face and sought, then asked, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" Genesis 17:17. He voiced his disbelief. God's answer was clear. Then, unparalleled joy. Soon after, God appeared again, this time in the form of 3 divine visitors who came to Abraham's tent. As they rested and ate, one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." Sarah, listening behind the tent, couldn't contain her own laughter. Perhaps it was a laugh of disbelief, a mixture of hope and utter irony. After all, she was 90 years old, and Abraham was 100. How could they possibly have a child at that age? But God gently confronted her, not with anger, but with a question that echoes through the ages. Why did Sarah laugh and say, "Shall I indeed bear a child, now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Genesis 18:13-14. This moment encapsulates the essence of Abraham and Sarah's story. Even when faith seemed fragile, even when human logic screamed impossibility, God reaffirmed that nothing, absolutely nothing, is too hard for him. And then, the unexpected happened. Sarah conceived. At the appointed time, precisely as God had promised, she gave birth to Isaac. The laughter of disbelief turned into a laughter of pure, unadulterated joy. In Genesis 21, Sarah declared, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." Isaac's arrival wasn't just the fulfillment of a promise, it was irrefutable confirmation that God is faithful, even when everything seems utterly unlikely. Isaac became the son of promise, the heir Abraham and Sarah had waited decades for. And so, the laughter of doubt became the song of joy. So, what impossible promise are side-tied laughing at today? What situation in your life seems too difficult, too delayed, too absurd for God to handle? I challenge you, bring that impossible situation to God. Watch as he turns your laughter of disbelief into shouts of joy. Is anything truly anything caught too hard for the Lord? The hardest test of faith isn't about suggesting something from God. It is about jiving up down everything, even your most cherished dream, even the very thing that represents God's own promise to you. Could you do it? Would you? When Isaac was a young man, Abraham's life seemed to have finally achieved stability. He had the promised son, a legitimate heir, the certainty that God was fulfilling his promises. But it was precisely at this peak, at the moment of greatest contentment, that God called him to the ultimate test of faith. In Genesis 22, God said to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." It's impossible to truly grasp the weight of these words. God was asking Abraham to sacrifice the son he had waited decades for, the son who represented the fulfillment of all divine promises, the very lineage through which the Messiah would come. This wasn't just a son, he was the son of the world. And Abraham, he didn't hesitate. He got up early, prepared the wood, and set out with Isaac and 2 servants towards the appointed place. During the 3-day journey, the silence must have been deafening, the internal struggle unimaginable. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw from afar the place God had pointed out. He then said to the servants, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." These words reveal Abraham's unshakable faith. Despite everything, he believed that God had a plan, that somehow both he and Isaac would return. As they climbed the mountain, Isaac, innocent, asks, "My father, here is the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham's reply, profound and prophetic, echoes through eternity. God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. At the top of the mountain, Abraham built the altar. He bound Isaac, he laid him on the wood. He raised his hand, knife poised to sacrifice his son. It was the ultimate act of surrender. And then, at that precise, agonizing moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham. Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." At that moment, Abraham saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He took the animal and offered it as a burnt offering in place of Isaac. Abraham called that place Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide, because he understood that God was faithful in supplying everything counting that was needed. This experience was not only the supreme test for Abraham, but also a profound foreshadowing of the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus, the Son of God, the true Lamb, who would be delivered in favor of all humanity. So I challenge you, what Isaac is God asking you to lay down? What is your most cherished possession, your deepest dream, your ultimate security, that God might be asking you to surrender? Is your obedience conditional on understanding, or are you willing to trust that God will provide, even in the darkest valleys? Will you surrender your greatest treasure, trusting God's perfect provision? Abraham's story isn't just ancient history. It is not just a collection of incredible events. It is or spiritual lineage. It's a blueprint for Sotyard faith journey. His life continues to speak to us today, echoing through millennia, because he became the father of faith for every single one of us who believes. After the monumental test on Mount Moriah, Abraham's life continued as a living reflection of God's faithfulness. He had passed the supreme test, and the Lord reaffirmed his promises in an even grander way. In Genesis 22:17-18, God declared, "I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." This promise was no longer just about land or a child. It was about an eternal legacy. Through Abraham's lineage, all nations would be blessed. This was a clear, undeniable foreshadowing of the Messiah, Jesus, who would come to save the world. Abraham was now not only a physical father but a spiritual one, an example of radical, unwavering faith for all generations. Despite all the promises fulfilled, Abraham continued to live in a simple, humble way. He recognized he was just a pilgrim on earth, living in tents, surrounded by his flocks and servants, but always with his eyes fixed on what God would do in the future. He knew that Canaan was merely a reflection of the true, heavenly homeland that awaited him. In the last years of his life, Abraham experienced the joy of seeing Isaac grow. He also took deliberate steps to ensure his legacy was well underway before he died. He took care to find a wife for Isaac, ensuring God's promises would continue to be fulfilled through the next generation. Rebekah became Isaac's wife, and so the story of faith and blessing continued. Abraham lived to be 175 years old and was buried in the cave of Machpelah, next to Sarah, whom he loved so much. Even after his death, his influence remained. He's consistently cited in the Bible as the quintessential example of faith and obedience. Someone who believed God even when everything seemed impossible. As Paul writes in Romans 4-3, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Abraham's story challenges us directly. He was called to leave his land, and by obeying, he became the father of a multitude, a friend of God, and a source of inspiration for all who walk by faith. His journey, marked by radical obedience, painful struggles, and unbelievable breakthroughs, is a powerful testimony to how God transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary stories. He trusted God without knowing where he was going. He believed God for children when he was too old. He surrendered his most precious possession because God asked. His story challenges taught to live with faith, to obey without reservation, and to trust that God is faithful to fulfill his promises, even when they seem utterly impossible. Abraham showed us that the true inheritance isn't material, it's spiritual. He lived for something far greater than his own life, and his story stands as an invitation for all of us to follow that same path of radical faith and fearless obedience. So, what kind of legacy are you building? Are you living as a pilgrim, looking for the heavenly city? Are you willing to embrace radical faith, just like Abraham, so that your story, too, points to the incredible faithfulness of God? The choice is yours. Embrace the journey. Embrace the impossible.